Have you ever wondered why a woman's silence carries more weight than her words? Why her detachment pierces deeper than anger? And why her withdrawal haunts a man long after her presence has faded? It is because in that quiet severing, in that subtle but absolute refusal to cling, she embodies a power older than civilization itself. Carl Jung would say she has touched the archetype of the self. She no longer plays the game of pleasing or persuading, but stands as a mirror to the male unconscious. And that mirror does not flatter, it exposes. When a woman detaches, the man is confronted with something he cannot control, the collapse of his illusion. For so long, he has believed that her loyalty, her nurturing, her forgiveness are guarantees written into the script of his ego. He imagines her as the eternal giver, the one who will always remain. But when she steps back into herself, when she withdraws her energy, his world begins to fracture. It is not merely the loss of a person, it is the loss of a reflection, the death of a fantasy, the unraveling of his projected anima. In that void, a man often encounters what Jung called the shadow, the dark, repressed contents of the psyche he has refused to face. Without her presence to soften him, to absorb his rage, to validate his dominance, he is forced into silence with himself. And silence is unbearable for the uninitiated man. It gnaws at him, whispering truths he cannot tolerate, that his power was borrowed, that his identity was inflated, that he never truly possessed her. Detachment does not simply wound his pride, it reveals its fragility. This is why detachment feels dangerous. It strips away the illusions that sustain the masculine ego. Many men will fight against it with anger, with accusations, with desperate attempts to reclaim her attention. But beneath all of that is fear. The fear of his own smallness, his own insignificance, once she ceases to orbit his world. For a man accustomed to being needed, nothing terrifies him more than a woman who does not need him. And here lies the first truth. Detachment is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is the moment a woman refuses to participate in the unconscious contract that keeps her bound to his wounds. She no longer soothes what he refuses to heal. She no longer explains what he does not wish to understand. She simply withdraws, and in doing so, she forces him to stand naked before his own psyche. Some men collapse under this weight. Others begin the painful journey of self-confrontation. But none remain unchanged. You might not realize how potent this silence is until you've witnessed it. When a woman detaches, she is not merely walking away from a man, she is walking toward herself. She claims her energy back from the endless spiral of justification and compromise. She reclaims the sacred ground of her own soul, no longer offering it as a stage for his projections. This is the act Jung described as individuation, the return of energy from the external object back into the self. And when a woman embodies this, she is no longer prey to his desire. She becomes mystery itself. Mystery, however, is intolerable to the insecure ego. Men conditioned by conquest do not understand what cannot be possessed. They mistake her quietness for coldness, her indifference for arrogance, when in truth it is liberation. He cannot grasp that she has entered a state beyond his control, a sovereignty that has nothing to do with him. And yet, paradoxically, this is precisely what deepens his obsession. For what the ego cannot dominate, it desires. What it cannot bind, it worships in secret. There is something profoundly unsettling about realizing that the woman you once thought belonged to you does not even belong to herself anymore. She belongs to something greater. Her detachment reveals her connection to an archetypal current of feminine power, the eternal virgin, not in purity of body, but in sovereignty of soul. She is whole unto herself, ungoverned by approval, untouched by his need. In this way, she ceases to be a woman in his story and becomes a symbol in his unconscious, forever haunting, forever elusive. And you listening now must understand this. Detachment is not about punishment. It is not about withholding love to manipulate or wound. It is about remembering who you are when the noise of his demands and projections finally fades. It is about reclaiming the silence where your soul can breathe. And in that silence, something dangerous awakens. Not because it harms him, but because it dismantles everything false in him. The man will never admit this truth aloud. He will cloak it in anger, disguise it as indifference, pretend he has moved on. But deep within, the archetypal wound lingers, the memory of the woman who did not bend, the echo of her silence that no noise can drown. Detachment, to him, is both the end and the beginning. The end of illusion, the beginning of his confrontation with himself. And whether he grows from it or remains imprisoned in bitterness, that is no longer her concern. Detachment carries with it a paradoxical fire. The more it withdraws, the more it illuminates. In Jungian terms, this is the withdrawal of projections, the tearing away of the anima from the woman onto whom a man has cast his fantasies. For the woman, this is liberation. For the man, it is devastation. His unconscious, accustomed to seeing her as a canvas for his needs, suddenly confronts the blankness of a soul that refuses to serve as mirror. That blankness is unbearable because it reflects his own emptiness back at him. This is the second dangerous truth about female detachment. It reveals to a man that his power was never over her, but always borrowed from her. When she detaches, he does not simply lose her body, her words, or her presence. He loses the supply of meaning he siphoned from her energy. Like a man who has lived on borrowed fire, he is left in darkness, realizing that his light was not his own. Few men will ever confess this aloud. Instead, they mask the void with bravado, pretending they are unaffected. But silence is louder than words. The absence of her gaze unmasks the truth. His confidence was dependent, his dominance conditional, his worth precariously tied to her attention. Think of how many men crumble not when a woman screams at them, but when she no longer cares. Anger can be negotiated with. Begging can be appeased. But indifference? Indifference is untouchable. It signals that the game is over, the strings have been cut, and no performance of charm, rage, or manipulation can draw her back. This is why detachment is feared. It cannot be controlled, only endured. And you, the woman listening, must understand the depth of this fear. Detachment forces him into a confrontation with mortality itself, the death of the fantasy that she was his possession, the death of the illusion that he could always call her back. For a man who has never done the work of shadow integration, this feels like annihilation. Jung taught that the ego resists anything that threatens its supremacy. Female detachment does precisely this. It reminds him that his power is limited, that love cannot be commanded, that her soul is beyond ownership. The Stoics understood this paradox. Marcus Aurelius wrote that to depend on anything external for your sense of worth is to live in chains. Seneca warned that clinging breeds suffering. When a woman detaches, she embodies this wisdom in flesh. She lives as if she has nothing to lose because she realizes she cannot lose herself. And this is what terrifies the male ego, her worth no longer being negotiable. He cannot bargain with it, cannot diminish it, cannot inflate it. It simply is. Notice how men react in such moments. Some grow vindictive, attempting to punish her silence. Others drown themselves in distraction. New women, new achievements, new conquests, hoping to silence the ghost of the one who withdrew. But none of it satisfies. For once a man has tasted the power of a woman who truly detaches, he knows the difference between possession and presence. And that difference haunts him. Possession is shallow, fleeting, easily replaced. Presence is eternal, and when lost, it lingers as absence, echoing in every corner of his psyche. The woman, however, stands on sacred ground. By detaching, she steps outside the dance of control and reaction. She no longer plays the archetypal mother who soothes his wounds, nor the lover who validates his desire, nor the maiden who entertains his fantasies. She becomes something else entirely, the wise woman, the figure who no longer bends to be chosen, but chooses herself. In myth and legend, this is the figure who men chase not with lust, but with reverence, knowing they cannot claim her, but only bow before her mystery. And if you are that woman, hear this. Your detachment does not make you cold. It makes you whole. It does not strip away your femininity. It deepens it, purifies it, frees it from the roles projected onto you. To detach is to say, I will not betray myself in order to comfort your wounds. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect at its highest form. Carl Jung knew that individuation often begins in rupture. For a woman, detachment is that rupture. It breaks the unconscious bonds that kept her chained to the masculine shadow. It returns her energy to the depths of her own being, where her self waits like a quiet flame. And once she enters that fire, she is not diminished. She is reborn. Yet men will never admit the depth of this rebirth. To do so would be to confess their dependence, to acknowledge that the center of gravity was never their own. And so they stay silent, carrying the wound in secret, haunted by the one truth they cannot face, that her detachment was not a loss of love, but the revelation of her sovereignty. The third dangerous truth of female detachment is this: it awakens in men the archetypal wound of abandonment, a primal terror they would rather bury than acknowledge. Beneath every posture of strength, beneath every mask of indifference, there lies the child who once feared being left behind, unseen, unloved. A woman's detachment rips that veil wide open, and suddenly he is not the man of confidence, but the boy staring at the closed door of a mother who will not return. Carl Jung described this rupture as the return of the repressed, the psyche dragging to the surface what the ego has long denied. For the man, this is unbearable because he has built his identity on the illusion of control. He conquers, he commands, he performs strength. But her detachment collapses the stage. It leaves him with no audience, no validation, no echo of his dominance. In that silence, he is forced to meet himself. And most men, untrained in shadow work, cannot bear the confrontation. They lash out, they numb themselves, they rush into new conquests, all to drown out the ancient ache of the abandoned child. But the woman who detaches has already moved beyond this cycle. She does not detach to punish, nor to wound. She detaches because she refuses to mother the unhealed boy within him. She withdraws because she knows she cannot fill the hole he carries. That hole belongs to him alone. It is his initiation, his work, his descent into shadow. And until he chooses to confront it, every relationship he touches will be poisoned by projection. You, as the woman who has tasted detachment, must understand the depth of what you embody here. You are not simply leaving a man, you are awakening his confrontation with himself. And whether he admits it or not, this confrontation terrifies him. He may tell others you were cold, that you stopped caring, that you lost interest. But the truth he cannot speak is that your silence became a mirror to his emptiness. He cannot articulate it because to do so would be to confess that his worth was never secure, that his identity was built upon your constant reassurance. This is why Jung insisted that love without individuation collapses into dependency. When a woman detaches, she withdraws from this dependency, refusing to feed the fragile architecture of his ego. She no longer plays the role of healer to his unacknowledged wounds. And that refusal, paradoxically, is what makes her unforgettable. For while he may find others to play the role of comforter or rescuer, he will never again encounter the abyss of mystery that her detachment revealed. Detachment is therefore erotic in its own way, not in the shallow sense of seduction, but in the deeper, dangerous sense of awakening desire through absence. When she is gone, he realizes how much of himself he invested in her presence. When she refuses, he realizes how much of his hunger depended on her yes. In this way, detachment awakens his obsession, not because she is cruel, but because she has withdrawn the drug of validation he never knew he was addicted to. The Stoics would say this is the necessary discipline of life, to learn that nothing external belongs to you, not even the affection of another. Epictetus warned against chaining your heart to what can vanish. And yet men who cling to the illusion of ownership never heed this wisdom until it is too late. A detached woman becomes their teacher, not through lectures, but through absence. Her silence speaks the law of impermanence. Nothing is guaranteed, not even her. For the woman, detachment is not cold distance, but a sacred boundary. It is the refusal to participate in the endless cycle of projection. It is the line drawn not in anger, but in dignity. She does not beg to be understood. She does not explain herself into exhaustion. She withdraws, and in doing so, she creates space for her own soul to breathe again. In Jungian terms, this is her anima returning to the self, no longer scattered across the battlefield of his ego. And this is what he cannot admit, that her detachment, while painful, may be the only force strong enough to push him toward growth. For in losing her, he loses the illusion of permanence, the comfort of projection, the false belief that love can be possessed. He stands at the crossroads of shadow work, trembling at the threshold of his own psyche. Most men will run, a few will endure. But either way, her detachment has already done its work. It has stripped him bare. And if you, the listener, are the woman who has learned this power, know this. Detachment does not make you heartless. It makes you whole. It does not mean you do not love. It means you refuse to betray yourself in the name of love. It is not abandonment of him. It is a return to yourself. And in that return lies your sovereignty, your mystery, your fire. The fourth dangerous truth about female detachment is that it transforms the woman herself into an untouchable archetype. Once she steps out of the dance of appeasement and steps fully into her sovereignty, she ceases to be merely a figure in a man's personal story. She becomes something far larger, something his ego cannot diminish. To him, she becomes myth. To herself, she becomes whole. Carl Jung wrote that archetypes are primordial images buried deep in the collective unconscious. They are not invented. They are discovered, revealed when life strips away illusions. When a woman detaches, she awakens the archetype of the untamed feminine, sometimes the wise woman, sometimes the virgin in her ancient sense of being whole unto herself, sometimes the goddess who refuses to kneel. This is not an act of rebellion for its own sake. It is the natural consequence of individuation. She has found herself, and in finding herself, she no longer trades fragments of her soul for fleeting comfort. For the man who once thought he owned her, this transformation is intolerable. He feels it as betrayal, though in truth it is liberation. Her detachment destroys the fantasy that she was a character written to serve his plot. He now realizes that she was never his to possess. She was always her own, merely lending him pieces of her light until she chose to withdraw them. And that choice cracks open his unconscious like thunder. He cannot admit it, but deep inside, he knows. Her absence reveals his dependence. Her silence reveals his emptiness. Her sovereignty reveals his smallness. This is why so many men become haunted by the memory of a detached woman. She lives in their dreams, not as a lover, but as an enigma. He remembers her not for what she gave, but for what she refused to give. He recalls not the time she yielded, but the moment she withdrew. For in that withdrawal, she shattered his illusion of control. He can replace her body, but he cannot replace her mystery. And mystery is the most addictive force of all. You must see the paradox clearly. The less she offers, the more he hungers. The more she withdraws, the more he obsesses. Because what he desires is not merely her touch, but the validation of his dominance. When she refuses to feed it, he is left starving. And in that hunger, he comes face to face with the shadow Jung warned of, the dark truth that no amount of conquest, no number of women, no accumulation of status will ever fill the void within. Only self-confrontation can. Only individuation can. But most men will not admit this. They will simply say, she was cold. The Stoics spoke often of freedom as detachment from externals. Seneca taught that the wise person loves without clinging, gives without expecting return. In her silence, in her refusal to bargain away her soul, the detached woman embodies this philosophy. She is not dependent on his recognition, nor is she consumed by his rejection. She walks with the serenity of one who knows her worth rests in the eternal, not in the wavering opinions of men. This serenity is what unsettles him most. Her indifference is not born of hatred, but of peace, and peace cannot be manipulated. Look deeper into this moment. The woman who detaches is not simply walking away, she is being reborn. She has entered what Jung called the process of individuation, the unification of the conscious and unconscious, the birth of the self. She is no longer fragmented by the need to be chosen. She chooses. She no longer bleeds herself dry to fill another's wounds. She lets him face his shadow, even if it means he curses her for it. This is her rite of passage, and it is sacred. And for you, the listener who may be standing at the edge of such a decision, know this. Detachment is not the end of love. It is the beginning of true love. The love of self, the love of soul, the love that no longer begs, bargains, or breaks. It is dangerous only to those who feed on dependency. To you, it is liberation. This is the truth men rarely admit. Female detachment is not their enemy, but their unacknowledged teacher. It strips away their illusions, confronts them with their shadows, awakens their primal wounds, and reminds them that no soul can be possessed. Many will resist this lesson. Some will hate you for embodying it. But the few who dare to face their pain will find that your detachment was the catalyst for their growth. And so the story ends, not with cruelty, but with clarity. The woman who detaches is not lost. She is found. She no longer waits for his recognition, nor trembles at his withdrawal. She walks forward into her own sovereignty, carrying within her the fire of the eternal feminine, the fire that cannot be owned, only witnessed, only revered.